What's up, y'all? It's T-Tar, and yes, the Chinese Riddler has teased the timeless place in Scarlet and Violet. At a glance, this doesn't make sense, but I'm gonna show you just what's going on. So, he posted a new tweet that this stems from, and it says, Dragon Palace, what would it be? Now, this is talking about Scarlet and Violet, and at a glance, it doesn't make too much sense, but there's something hidden behind the word Dragon Palace, and it goes back to what the Scarlet and Violet story is about. So if I made a video on this called Heath as a Time Traveler or something, but it's a cool story of a real life mythology that seems to pair up with events that play out in Scarlet and Violet. So for example, there's this guy who runs into a turtle, and when he follows the turtle, he ends up in this underwater dome where he falls in love with like the most beautiful woman, and he's enjoying his time there, but he starts to miss his family. And when he finally can go back home from the underwater dome, hundreds of years have passed. He can't see his family anymore. Now there's a couple details here. The turtle that takes him there has a flowing tail, like Pterophagus. Turtles don't have this kind of tail. And in some versions of the story, it's written as a 5-colored turtle, the same way Pterophagus is a multicolored turtle. And last but not least, the dome underwater that they're taken to is called the Dragon Palace. The fun I made in that video is that Heath was entranced by this turtle and led to Area Zero, and the same kind of story plays out where he gets trapped in there and is experiencing time differently than the rest of the world is. Whether that means he's still in Area Zero right now, or if he really did die 200 years ago, that's the thought. But comparing Scarlet and Violet's story to the Shimako story was always just us having fun until this tweet where he acknowledges the relevancy of something that only happens in that story, the existence of the Dragon Palace. So now let's look at his tweet. The Dragon Palace, what would it be? So he's saying in Scarlet and Violet, what would the equivalent of this timeless place be? In the other story, it's the main character's dream place, where everything is perfect, except for the fact that he doesn't have his family there. In the story, he only spends like 2-3 years there. So it's like time flows 100 times faster outside than in the Dragon Palace. Could there be a Dragon Palace-like area in Scarlet and Violet? You know, it really is like the time chamber from Dragon Ball. If you go in there and spend just a day, months could pass on the outside. It brings up an interesting idea, right? Let's say Heath he was lured by Pterophagus to the deepest part of Area Zero, which has the effects of the Dragon Palace. If Heath just spent 2 years there, which translates to 200 on the outside, it would make sense if we freaking run into Heath in the second DLC. Obviously, all of this is wishful thinking, but I mean, we are playing a time travel game. It's not far-fetched to talk about time travel and time flowing differently in different places. The only reason I don't say Area Zero itself is the Dragon Palace is because we freely go in and out and time is moving normally. If it is somewhere in Area Zero, it has to be at the very deepest part. So that's why it can't be this crystal room either, which for some reason it looks like we're inside Pterophagus or something. We still don't know what's up with this room. But I want to give you guys a bunch of ideas, right? So for example, instead of thinking of Heath as the Urashima Taro of this story, there's actually a character introduced in the second DLC that's name is Taro. She's one of the Blueberry Elite 4, and it's Lacey. Her Japanese name is Taro. She also has the hairpins, and she's the only one Riddler Khu eliminated from the holds the key riddle. I do wonder if there's something interesting about her. Not to bring up the whole Heath family thing again. There's so many candidates for people related to Heath. First Briar, now her. We're not gonna go down that rabbit hole, but I think it's interesting her name is that. Which brings us to Blueberry Academy. That is an underwater dome, the terrarium. That could be the Dragon Palace. But of course, it doesn't fully make sense to be because time doesn't move differently there. So there could be something the director, Cyrano, is conspiring, and that's why he made that dome there. Like there's something underneath. Okay, so let's see. People in the comments are thinking like Dragon Eevee, a Dragon Palace Pokemon. I'm gonna assume it's the time machine, but not like how everyone assumes. You know, that is interesting. If you could harness the power of this hypothetical Dragon Palace, that sounds like the key to making the time machine. But that whole Dragon Palace could be an effect of Pterophagus' powers, which means just using its crystal is enough to make the time machine. Whatever. It could be our DA system. I don't know what that is. Where more time passes inside by traveling into it than outside the pocket. So we spend unknown amount of time hunting Pokemon and we can return like we never left. Well, that's a reverse of the Dragon Palace. See, this kind of Dragon Palace could easily explain how dinosaur era Pokemon can be in Area Zero 200 years ago, you know? Naturally, they found their way into the Dragon Palace. Somehow they came back out, they're in Area Zero. But where I'm always stumped is the counterpart to this game, where somehow time travel has to happen in the opposite direction. Like, I want you guys to think there's still the ongoing mystery that the game itself told us to think about, which is that the Paradox Pokemon are wandering Area Zero 200 years ago, but shouldn't exist until Sada and Taro pulled them out in the current day. Not only that, it sounds like when Sada and Taro 10ish years ago went to Area Zero, there were no Paradox Pokemon, or else they wouldn't have made the time machine to pull them out. This is why the simplest solution has always been that Heath lied on his adventures and made a bunch of scribbles up in stories, and then Sada and Taro, so infatuated with it, go to Tropius and make it all come to life. Because I think an outcome that we have to brace ourselves for is that they aren't actually past and future Pokemon. That even though we have stories for how Amoonguss inspired the Pokeball and maybe can still exist in the past, and how a scientist combined Gallade and Gardevoir to make Iron Valiant, even though we have these stories, that they might be made up. Because there's no reason to call these Paradox Pokemon. In their Pokedex entry, it should just say past Pokemon or ancient Pokemon and then future Pokemon for all the Violet ones. They use those words in game. Taro calls them future Pokemon and Sada calls them ancient Pokemon, but that's not what it says on their decks. And just being a time traveler is not a paradox. Somehow, whatever these Paradox Pokemon are has to not make sense. What you might call ancient Pokemon. I think what would be cool about this whole Dragon Palace tweet is if Cyrano made the dome as a dazzling red herring, and it's actually built on top of the Dragon Palace, and Cyrano's trying to get into it. Now, of course, while Khu's tweet does give more reason to believe Scarlet and Violet is kind of a counterpart to that Japanese story, not all the details have to line up. For example, in that story, there's a creature even above the turtle called the Dragon King, but I don't think it's gonna go that deep. Clearly, Tropius should be the apex of what we're going for here. Another thing is Briar. Briar comes with us to Kitakami. If the Dragon Palace really was under the terrarium like that, would she not be focused on it? Clearly, she would be trying to get into that too. You know what? The DLC trailers say at the end of everything, we return back to Area Zero, right? After Blueberry Academy 2. So maybe what we're gonna find out in the first DLC is a hint to where the Dragon Palace is. And then in the second DLC, when we go to Blueberry, we find out more hints and uncover that the Dragon Palace is actually underneath Area Zero. And that's why we have to return there. Because I mean, the Dragon Palace is home to the turtle. Unless the turtle crawls out of there, that's the only place you're gonna meet Tropius. I guess that's the twist. The reason we return to Area Zero at the end is because we find out that's where the timeless place is. Tropius is home. And that's the hidden treasure of Area Zero! The Dragon Palace, oh shoot! I hope you watch these videos and don't think I'm too cracked out. That's the greatest treasure you could hope for. Because it's not just a little bubble where time moves differently. It's a whole extravagant palace where all your dreams, you have everything you want. Like the guy in the story, he's living his best life in this palace with the woman he loves and all the food in the world. That's the greatest treasure. The only downside is you get stuck in time if you go there. Could you imagine, man? You go into areas, you go there and Heath is just eating dinner. Like he doesn't even notice how much. You know, that's actually cool. Instead of Briar being Heath's daughter and her being this weird time-traveling girl, let her be the actual Longway descendant and meet her freaking ancestor dad in Area Zero, who was just there for 2 years. You know? He should be the main time traveler. And actually, on that note, if Heath just saw little bits of visions and it looks like he was going crazy when he wrote that book, what would happen to Heath if he was with Tropius for a couple years? He might actually be crazy. He might actually like fight us and be bad, trying to protect Tropius or something. Look at me talking as if Heath's really gonna turn out to be alive. That's like the main thing I want now. There's nothing more eerie than seeing photographs of someone from 200 years ago and then they're standing in front of you. But you know, this does raise the question, right? If the Paradox Pokemon are paradoxes, not actually from the past and future, where did Sada and Taro really go? They got transported to the Dragon Palace. I gotta end this video. Alright, I'm gonna call it quits here. Make sure y'all shank the like button. Flood your ideas in the comments. We're all crazy here, but with reason this time. This is actual reason to be crazy. No Pokemon game in history has allowed us to think such stupid thoughts and they be relevant. we're actually thinking about time travel, and we have reason to believe. Let's see where these DLCs bring us. I'll see you on the next video. Take care.